Pokemon Emerald is a lot of things to a lot of people. When it originally released back in 2004, 2005 nationally, across the US and other territories, it represents a lot of things for, again, a lot of people. It's considered to be one of the best Pokemon games, one of the best Game Boy Advance games of all time, and to me personally, one of my personal favorite games of all time as well. Pokemon Emerald and the Pokemon franchise in general is a series that I grew up with a lot when I was a kid. It's only recently that I've gotten back into it from a lot of the earlier days, just because a lot of the media in recent years, especially for the video games, really hasn't reached the same quality that we saw back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Pokemon Emerald is a perfect example of this as a game, not just as a Pokemon game, but as a video game in general, for how brilliantly it pulls off all of its mechanics, from the story to the music, and to everything else that you would want from a turn-based RPG. Which, in essence, is what the Pokemon series really is at its core, at least for the main games. This video here today isn't just going to be a review of Pokemon Emerald, this is going to be a remake review of a video that I did a long while back. At the end of the day, this is a review that I've been wanting to redo, just because I wasn't really satisfied with the original video that I was working on. So, with that being said, let's get into my thoughts on the legendary classic, and one of my personal favorites, Pokemon Emerald. My introduction to Pokemon Emerald was fortunately when the game came out, as I was fortunate enough to grow up in an era where a lot of these iconic and legendary games were releasing back on earlier consoles like the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1, with a lot of good games that people know today. I first played Pokemon Emerald back when it released back in 2004, and this was my really big introduction to the Pokemon franchise as a whole. Because while I did grow up watching the anime and read some of the earlier manga and that kind of thing, the video games were obviously the big staple and draw of this franchise. And I grew up playing Generation 3 as my very first ever Pokemon experience. I played Pokemon Emerald, I played Leaf Green for the remakes of Gen 1, and I kind of went and played them from there with Gen 4, Gen 5, eventually went back and experienced Gen 2, and a number of other games in the series. And Pokemon Emerald really introduced me to this series, and it was something that I still love to this day. While I'm not the biggest fan of a lot of the later entries in the Pokemon video game franchise, Emerald is still a game that not only do I enjoy as a Pokemon experience, but as a video game in general to go back and play because it does so many things right. Compared to a lot of other criticisms that I've seen online of this particular game, which we'll talk about here a little later, this game is fantastic from start to finish. And if you haven't experienced this game for some reason, or you have played it in the past, dust off an old copy and give it another shot, because what I'm going to be talking about in this video is just how fantastic it is. Visually, Pokemon Emerald looks fantastic. Regardless of my nostalgia or whatever anyone else thinks on the actual Pokemon franchise, as a video game on the Game Boy Advance, this game looks absolutely fantastic. From beginning to end, this game is a visual treat throughout all the animations of the Pokemon in battle, the different locations that you visit around the Hoenn region, the bright poppy colors, the blues of the ocean, the greens of the overworld as you travel through different forests, whether you're traveling through Fortress City, for instance, whether you're going down any of the various routes in the game, and just seeing the luscious greenery environments. Everything just pops and stands out. The character sprites in their chibi form, whether it be your main character or any of the other main cast you encounter, look very detailed despite the chibi nature, and it adds a lot of charm to the game on that one regardless. The actual battles that take place with the Pokemon, this generation introduced a little animation for each of them whenever they pop up on screen, adding a little bit of a personality rather than just appearing as a static image like a lot of older RPGs do. No matter which way I decide to describe it, Pokemon Emerald looks fantastic, and it's top-notch visuals on the console. And they don't get much better than this on the Game Boy Advance. The music in Emerald is a bit more of a contentious point, because while I think this soundtrack is fantastic in many different regards, a lot of people don't care for this one as much compared to a lot of the Pokemon games, which there are some fair criticisms in there as well. It doesn't have as much variety as some of the other games. There's a lot of the same instruments included within the soundtrack. You have a lot of trumpets, you have a lot of brass instruments, and to some people, the tracks can really blend together. That being said, though, there is a ton of variety within this game in terms of the music, because every single track fits the theme of the area. It's poppy, it's upbeat, it gets you in the mood to go on an adventure and travel around the Hoenn region. Whenever there's a big dramatic moment, like you're facing off against Team Magma or Team Aqua, the antagonist of this game, the music definitely fits the theme. Even the beginning town that you start off with in Little Root has that old, just homey sounding music, like that old nostalgic RPG music that a lot of people remember playing these games for the first time. And traveling through the various routes, different towns, cities, even the music theme whenever you're surfing along each of the different areas, it fits the theme and aesthetic so well. I can't do the soundtrack justice by trying to describe it. I just think it's fantastic. Despite the repetitive use of instrumentals like trumpets, which again might be a fair criticism, the soundtrack really doesn't have a lot of variety outside of using brass instruments. But despite that little nitpick, the soundtrack is extremely fantastic. And again, I can't do it justice by describing it here. Listen to what I'm showing here in this video for yourself, and look up the OST on YouTube. I think you guys are going to get a lot more out of it if you play the game or listen to it for yourselves. But the soundtrack and the visuals, top notch. A series like Pokemon, you typically don't expect a really in-depth story or plot. And while a lot of the games in the series don't, especially the earlier ones, Emerald takes that extra step and bring an incredibly well-done story to you, in addition to having a Pokemon experience that you really enjoy for the gameplay. Because Pokemon Emerald raises the stakes so much and adds so many new features to the plot that a lot of other games in the franchise don't. You have two rival teams to take on this time around with Team Magma and Team Aqua, each of them trying to resurrect a legendary Pokemon from the previous Ruby and Sapphire games, Groudon and Kyogre, that eventually culminates in a fight between the two of them in Sootopolis City. Pokemon Emerald adds a lot of extra story content because of the fact not only are you taking on two rival teams and having a lot more interactions and story moments with them compared to a lot of the other Pokemon games where you're just facing off against one rival team, but you have extra content like going to the Sky Pillar with Wallace, the champion in this game, and waking up Rayquaza in an attempt to stop them and avert the world from disaster, with some very cool cinematic cutscenes that the franchise hadn't seen up to that point, at least up until 2004. Calming all of them down, and then having the option to go and catch all of them in the post-game after you go through your typical journey of beating all the gym leaders and becoming the champion. This game raises the stakes a lot more for a world-ending event, extra content with more legendaries to encounter, and having some better dynamics with two rival teams that, despite how dumb their motivations are and wanting to increase the land and the sea mass, it's still cool to see that they went the extra mile to have more interactions with fairly well-done villains that actually have somewhat of a redemption redemption arc at the end, unlike some of the other Pokemon games. So there's more in-depth storytelling here with the actual major events that you're participating in, and the rival enemy teams themselves. Gameplay of this game is pretty standard RPG gameplay and the typical Pokemon formula that everyone is familiar with. You have 3 starters available to you at the beginning of the game: Torchic, Mudkip, and Trico. Trico being my personal favorite Pokemon. You can choose a starter, raise it by having it battle against other Pokemon like trainers or wild Pokemon, recruit more to your team, level them up and evolve them, teach them new moves, fight other people in the game, and eventually work your way up to become the champion by defeating the gym leaders. I mean, this is a pretty typical formula, not really going to go too in-depth. Just know that if you enjoy this type of turn-based gameplay from the Pokemon games, it's done extremely well. The animation for the battles, the Pokemon variety that you have in the region is really well done, and they added a lot of unique things like having Pokemon natures, which affect how they act in battle, a lot more unique moves and TMs, for a variety of moves that you can learn to beat down your opponents. It's pretty good gameplay in terms of the actual battling. So nothing really in-depth for me to talk about there, or criticize for that matter. It's really well done. You can also participate in Pokemon contests, which isn't really for everybody. I personally found the contest a nice little distraction away from the normal battling and everything else you're doing in the game. You don't really get anything for it, but you do get some ribbons for your Pokemon, and it's just something cool to participate in to impress a set of judges using your moves and tripping up your opponents in a different form of gameplay, which I do think is a nice little variety. But the contests aren't going to be for everybody. And at the end of the day, too, the biggest thing gameplay-wise that Emerald brings is the Battle Frontier. This might be one of the biggest post-games of all time in Pokemon, because you have multiple different facilities available to you after you clear the game, and you get access to the Battle Frontier. You have multiple different facilities available to you in order to actually go and participate. Like the Battle Square, where you select 2 Pokemon, and your opponent selects 2 Pokemon, you battle against each other. The Battle Factory, once again, you use rental Pokemon instead to fight against your opponent. Or you have a number of other facilities where you have to randomly guess doors, you have to work your way up in a multitude of matches going up a large tower. There's a lot of variety here, and the Battle Frontier is a fantastic post-game for anyone who wants to anyone who wants to invest more time into the game and actually experience more of what the post-game has to offer. What I will say is, though, is that the Battle Frontier, as cool as I think it is not worth the time investment to beat each of the Frontier Brains, earning the symbols to show that you conquered each of the facilities, because in order for you to actually face the Frontier Brains, which you have to beat a total of 2 to 3 times apiece, you have to go through dozens of battles without losing. And you're going to be investing upwards of hundreds of hours in some cases trying to perfect these places without the right team or knowing the strategies to get through them. Do I think that it's a cool addition? Absolutely. If you're invested in the game or you want to enjoy more content from the game, absolutely tackle the Battle Frontier. Do I think you should complete it? Absolutely not. It is not worth the time sink and all the time and headache that you're going to be pouring into to try and actually make it to the Frontier Brains in the first place. But overall, despite how lengthy the Battle Frontier really is and not really worth doing to completion unless you're really dedicated, the gameplay in this game is good across the board. It's the standard Pokemon gameplay that you're used to, in addition to having just a lot of other cool things that you can do in the process. Pokemon Emerald, all in all, is a fantastic game. There's a reason why it's one of my favorite games of all time. Not just because of nostalgia, but because it's a very well done video game in general. From beautiful visuals, an amazing soundtrack, great Pokemon gameplay with a lot of extra stuff chucked in there like the contest and the battle frontier, and having more of an in-depth plot for you to enjoy with all the unique features, like having a father is a gym leader, facing off against two enemy teams, and having the epic moment where you have Rayquaza completely shut down Groudon and Kyogre. Fantastic to see on the Game Boy Advance. This game does have issues here and there. The soundtrack can get fairly repetitive. The different routes that you have to travel along, like the too much water argument that a lot will make about Emerald, while it is true to a degree, it definitely adds to the aesthetic of the region, so I don't really see it as a major issue. And the battle frontier dragging on a little too long and way too much of a time sink to be really worth it after a while. But despite some nitpicks here and there, Emerald is a fantastic game that I recommend people play, both for the first time and if you haven't really touched it in a while. This was the pinnacle and peak of classic Pokemon, and in a lot of ways, compared to the newer stuff, this game still stands above the rest. In order for you to actually play Emerald today, which I absolutely recommend you do, I love it. I think it's a fantastic game, and anyone should absolutely check it out, regardless if you're a fan or not. Getting a hold of a copy of Emerald today is crazy expensive. Despite the Omega Ruby and the Alpha Sapphire remakes on the 3DS, Emerald still contains a lot of unique content that didn't carry over to those remakes, unfortunately. So, as a result of that, and people wanting to go back and play it for the first time, the price on this thing has dramatically risen. Last I checked, a loose card of it is over $100, possibly up to $200 at this point. So while there are other methods for you to experience out there at your discretion, getting hold of a physical copy as an option, it's really expensive to do. But if you're able to track down a cheap copy or find some other way to play it, I absolutely recommend that you go and try out Pokemon Emerald and see what all the hype was about, and still is, for this game. And that's it today, guys, for a bit more of a lengthy review here on Pokemon Emerald. I've been wanting to re-review this game properly for a long time, because originally I did a video on this game quite a while ago on another channel that I wasn't quite satisfied with. And since I mentioned this game here and there on the show, I figured I may as well do a proper review of it and express to you guys in a way how much I love this game, without dragging it on to a long several-hour retrospective, briefly talking about how much I really enjoyed this game, and I'm sure a lot of other people out there in the community feel the same way about Emerald to this day. But let me know your thoughts on the video and Pokemon Emerald down in the comment section down below. Do you love this game? Do you not like it? Are there things that you agree with me on and things you don't? What were your experiences with playing it when it came out, or just in general? Let me know your thoughts on the game in the comment section down below if you so choose. I would love to talk with fellow fans about it. Give the video a like if you did enjoy it, as it really does help out the channel. And subscribe if you guys want to keep up with future content like game reviews, collection pickups, collaborations, and everything else we do here on the Nostalgia Factor for all things gaming nostalgia. Then that's all from me. And until next time, this has been Ryan from the Nostalgia Factor saying, keep on gaming.